If you have not filled out that pre-test, please go ahead and do so. All right. So welcome to the Oregon Friendly Driver class. My name is Lindsay Huber, she, her, and I'm the Education Director at the Street Trust in Portland. I'm joined today by Whitney Bennett, the Safe Routes to School Coordinator and Oregon Friendly Driver Educator at Commute Options in Bend. Please use the social media hashtag OATS22 to post about the summit on social media. And don't forget to visit our website at thestreettrust.org to learn more about our programs and activities. So in your control panel, there's a section where you can enter questions. Please feel free to drop questions in there. And then we should have time because we've got 90 minutes today to answer them. We'll try and keep an eye on them to see if they're little quick questions to answer right now. Otherwise, we'll answer them at the end. You should all be muted right now. But if you've got a question that's a little more complex, or you want to talk about like something that you see on your route as you're traveling around your community, you can also raise your hand and we can answer your questions that way. If you're listening on a phone, while you make some food, you can only see one image at a time, so you can swipe to see either Whitney or myself or our screen with the slides. All right, so you have just done the pre-test, hopefully, and then at the end, we're going to have a post-test to test, what did you come out of this knowing? This program is funded by the Oregon Department of Transportation, and the way that we get our funding is through having you guys do these pre and post tests to show that hopefully folks are learning something. So these classes are organized and taught through a partnership between Commute Options in Bend, the Street Trust in the Portland metro area, and Safe Lane Transportation Coalition in Eugene. These classes are designed to try and reduce the number of fatal crashes between people who are walking, riding bikes, and people driving. This training is available for free, so if you know more folks that should be taking this, either through a workplace, community group, or other organization, we do live trainings both in person as well as through webinars like this. The ones that are in person are in the Portland metro area, the Bend area, and some parts of Central Oregon, and then Lane County. We also have a recorded version of this course that you can do individually on our website, OregonFriendlyDriver.org. You can also reach out to us to schedule these different classes through that website. So I also wanted to mention, we know that this audience might be a little bit different than the usual folks that we teach, as many of you work in transportation and will know a little bit about these subjects already. So if you have feedback for us on how to improve this course, we'll have a place on the post test for feedback. So please share with us there or reach out via our website to help make this an even better class for Oregonians. All right. So in this class, we will be covering why crashes happen, what the law says for people walking, people riding bikes, and people who are driving, roadway features and infrastructure, common crash scenarios, and how to prevent them. And then again, we will end with that post test. All right, and now I'm passing it over to my colleague, Whitney.
Thank you, Lindsay. So you can, go ahead and advance it a couple times so we can get all this. There we are. So the emphasis and the kind of language that we choose to take with this program is really about bringing us all down to this human scale, that we are all people, whether we are people walking, people biking, or people driving. And so when we talk about Oregon Friendly Driver, it's really talking about how we can interact in a more cohesive way as humans, not as a car and a bike, but really humans using our infrastructure to safely get to the places that they need to go. And that we really like to emphasize that piece of it as we move through here in our language, and so that we can personalize with it. And that kind of gets us to the idea of what it means to be an Oregon Friendly Driver. And in this course, you're going to hear this throughout, is that it's above and beyond doing what is legal and not legal, but it really is about how, like I mentioned, how all of us as people and humans can just make it home at the end of the day. And when there's people driving, they tend to be containerized in a car and a bunch of metal that can protect them. And so there's going to be the people walking and biking are much more vulnerable. So we'll go more into that in a few later slides. So you can advance the slide, Lindsay. So why do we crash? And again, talking about the terms that we're choosing to use, starting with the idea, the word really crashes. And we use that word because we're not talking about accidents. We don't believe there are accidents, because an accident is really an unforeseen and an unplanned event or circumstance, whereas a crash is something, it's due to human error. We know the consequences of making certain choices, and so it's not an accident. So for example, if it's because of distracted driving, we're well aware, we've been educated about what the implications are from distracted driving. So when there is a crash from that, then it's not an accident. So it's important to make sure that we're just associating the right words with it, so we can really connect to the impact of and the responsibilities that we have as people driving, and also making our way around the infrastructure in different modes. So in urban areas, the crashes tend to happen on the busiest roads, and they're due to things such as speed and alcohol and failing to yield right of way. Half of the serious crashes, specifically in Portland, involve people who are walking or riding a bike, so they're much more vulnerable. In our more rural areas, it's still very similar, and ultimately some of the leading causes of these crashes for, say, a bike rider can be wrong way riding, and car drivers is really people driving is not yielding properly. So a lot of it comes down to education, hugely, and that it tends to be, like this graphic shows, kind of 50-50 at who is at fault. But because a person on a bike, for instance, tends to be much more vulnerable, they tend to be much more severely injured. And you're going to hear us talk a lot about people on bikes, as much as more so, sometimes, often more so than people walking, just because of the proximity of people on bikes and how they share that infrastructure, how they're really present on the road. So the interface between a person on a bike and a person driving is much more direct. So there's a lot more to talk on when we're talking about being Oregon-friendly drivers and who they're interacting with. And go ahead and advance the slide, Lindsay. So often a person riding can be at fault. Like we mentioned, they could be wrong way riding, and we'll kind of go into what that looks like in future slides. Left turn from right side of road, and then the failure to yield from the driveway, and a few of those other common reasons why there are crashes with people on bikes. And next slide. And then a person driving, taking a left turn in front of a person riding a bicycle. If you are, this is like a really nice group to be working with. You know, a lot of you are at this conference because you're active in some form of advocacy for transportation, and maybe you often are one of those on that side as a person riding a bike. So you might have a close experience with left turn in front of a person riding, or also right turn in front of a person riding a bike. These are incredibly common. It happened to me 2 days ago. And so being aware that there are just as many reasons why a person on a bike would be at fault for these common crashes that we're going to explore. Next slide. And then as I was explaining, the difference between a person on a bike, a person walking, and then a person in a car is just that vulnerability level. So there's a vulnerable user law that protects people that are not driving. And a vulnerable user would be a person walking, riding a horse, on a tractor. It really depends on where you're at and what region you're in our state. Or it could be a person rolling on a bike, skateboard, or scooter. And then there's also people that are doing work in the road that are not protected by a vehicle. So we in our program, we really want to take into consideration that without having yourself containerized, you're much more vulnerable. And our goal is to make sure there are 0 deaths. So that means that we have to go above and beyond to protect vulnerable users when we are those people driving. Next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned, there's a lot of our material that covers people on bikes because of that shared infrastructure. And so people on bicycles, when they're in the roadway, they are to follow the same rules as a person driving. Almost 100%. And majority of those rules apply to them. And as a person on a bike, there are times when that can shift. And we'll talk about those depending on where that person on the bike is riding and in what infrastructure they're in. But the main point of emphasizing this as a person driving, as an Oregon-friendly driver, is that you are to anticipate that that person on the bike will be kind of following the same rules of the road as you as a person driving, which includes things such as stopping at crosswalks. And they could be entering into your lane of traffic and making turns at the same intersections as you would. So anticipation and having your kind of expectations of what to expect is what being an Oregon-friendly driver really is. And the more we understand what to expect from people on bikes as people driving, the safer our roads will be, and the more likely it will be that everyone makes it home at the end of the day. Next slide. Okay, so typically these are done as like a poll, but what we did is we have these in here, and we want to make sure that even though between bites of your lunch or whatever you might be doing, you're still on board with us here. So just to kind of take a look at this slide and seeing, this is one of my favorite scenarios that we have. Seeing what you're looking at in our graphic is we have a white car that's taking a left-hand turn. And then we have a person on a bike that is wrong way riding. And then my question to everyone in our audience today is the person driving acting as an Oregon-friendly driver? And so I invite you to go into the chat and simply say yes, friendly, or not friendly. And so we can kind of get a little idea of what your thoughts are based on what you see in this image. I'll give you about 2 minutes to kind of put in some thoughts there. I'll take not sure. I understand. It's kind of a trick, but it's not a trick, really. The person in the white car, to clarify. The person driving the white car, taking the left-hand turn. All right, so awesome, great answers. Yes, all of those thoughts and initial reactions are true. And the idea here is, so you can click advance, Lindsay, and it's just going to give us a check mark or a, yeah, that's the red dot. So the person driving is acting as not friendly because they're taking that turn. And although the person on the bike is wrong way riding, which is against what we understand is legal as a person on a bike, the goal is for everyone to make it, like someone said in the chat, for everyone to make it home at the end of the day. So the chances of that person on the bike making it through a crash is not very likely, like they're going to make it home peacefully to dinner that night. So as an Oregon-friendly driver, the best thing to do is to go above and beyond what is, what you think, any lessons you think you need to teach anybody on the road, and stop and wait for that person on the bike to be to go through the intersection. And a little about wrong way riding quickly here, because I think we have another slide later, is this is a really common thing that we see for a lot of reasons. And one of them is initially when you are, say, a person walking, you would typically go the opposite direction in traffic to walk against traffic. And then when you get on a bike, that transition into knowledge and knowing that you should be actually going with traffic isn't always transferred as seamlessly. And there's a lot of other reasons why a person might be wrong way riding, but ultimately we just want to make sure everyone makes it home at the end of the day. And the person in the white car is not friendly, just to clarify, because they're the idea would be that they're continuing through that intersection and making that left-hand turn into the person on the bike. So just like to emphasize the difference in talking about this as people on bikes should be doing this, they should be more cautious. It's really, the purpose of this material is not to attack any certain user, but to try to elevate us all so we can be safer on the roads. And that's where we're also going to talk about why it's important as an Oregon-friendly driver after this course to be looking both directions and anticipate anything could be coming from different directions. Next slide, please. So in light of that, there are certain things that are the law for people on bikes that would be great if they all followed, but it doesn't always happen. We, as a Safe Route school coordinator, I go around to schools and I teach students about what's legal, how to be safe bike riders, when to put lights on, which direction to go in the bike lane. We're very small. We have a very small reach and we can't get everybody. If we could require everyone to have bike licenses, that would be fantastic. But this is kind of how we start to kind of get into the fabric of all users so that we can try to make the biggest impact. And as people driving, we have to get a driver's license. So we have a little bit more education to take with us into the roadway. This slide specifically is talking about what is required for a person on a bike, and they're really required to have a front white light and a rear red reflector that during times of poor visibility. So this could be when there's rain or there's snow, or just after sunset and then just before sunrise. So they're supposed to be well lit and visible. But point with this is, as an Oregon-friendly driver, it is wise to keep your eyes peeled when visibility is poor for vulnerable users, for people on bikes that may have forgotten their bike lights or their bike light ran out of battery. These things happen. I switch between a couple bikes, I leave my bike light on the other, and then, I don't have a light. So yes, the person on the bike would be much safer if they remembered their light and their reflective gear all the time, but also we want to all make it home at the end of the day. So just keeping your eyes peeled so that you can see other users when you're out driving when light is poor. Next slide. Okay, so unsafe passing of persons riding a bicycle. This is really great. I feel like this is kind of one of those little pearls that we don't all know 100% what is allowed. And specifically talking about in areas where speeds are 35 miles per hour or greater, and there is no bike lane, you as a person driving, wanting to pass a person on a bike, are required to provide fall distance. And fall distance is the amount of space that person on the bike plus the person would take up, you can see, if they fell sideways. So in order to give that fall distance, you have the legal right to cross the center line, whether it's a double yellow line or whatever the line is. You can legally cross that and go into the opposite lane of traffic as long as it's clear and safe to do so. So it's courteous, it's the safest way, and it's the best way to be an Oregon-friendly driver and speeds 35 miles an hour or greater. And this is on any road. So this is kind of something that urban, rural, wherever you are, it applies. In areas where it's less than 35 miles an hour, 1 second. You want to give the greatest distance possible to be an Oregon-friendly driver. I know in some areas, in more rural, urban areas, it's like they have some standard set distances of 3 feet. But in general, as an Oregon-friendly driver, we go above and beyond and we give as much space as we possibly can. Next slide, please. Okay, here's another opportunity to type on into the chat. So what you're looking at right here is there is a vehicle, a person driving, passing a person on a bike. So my question is the person driving acting as a Oregon-friendly driver? So go ahead and put that into the chat. And I'll drink some water. Nice, we're on a good roll here. So far we have 100% saying friendly. And yes, correct. So that person driving is giving plenty of space. And I like to emphasize on this one because that's a pretty large trailer. Another thing that's really important to, another reason why it's really important to provide that distance is because especially for large vehicles, there's a thing called wind blast. And when a large vehicle, big truck passes a person on a bike, that wind blast can knock the person on the bike off their bike. It can be very significant. So the bigger the vehicle you're driving, the bigger the space you should really try to provide. All right, next slide, please. Riding on the sidewalk. Okay, so this can vary by parts of a city, parts of a region, but in general, riding on the sidewalk in Oregon is something that is allowed in downtown areas and business districts. There are different rules that can be made locally that can restrict people from riding bicycles on sidewalks, and is always recommended to people who do ride that they pay attention to where there is this restriction. It is not the safest place to ride. Ultimately, what I teach all of the students when I'm teaching bike safety is that to get them off the sidewalk and be using the roads as they're supposed to. But that said, as an Oregon-friendly driver, is what we're asking if you do see a person riding a bike on a sidewalk, to be aware because of the fact that they could at any time leave the sidewalk and enter your lane of traffic, enter a bike lane, enter an intersection. So it's important as an Oregon-friendly driver to be aware, to be looking at sidewalks, at bike lanes, in all directions as you're approaching different parts of the road so that you can anticipate what might happen and be able to have time to react to if a person on a bike is entering the sidewalk. This is also relevant in driveways. Obviously, as a person driving, pulling out of a driveway, you want to check both ways to make sure there's no people coming on those sidewalks. It's a lot harder to see when people are on bikes on the sidewalks. So having those, that perspective, having those eyes wide open to be able to catch that if there is anybody coming. Next slide. All right, so here's our stop is yield law. Let's go to the next slide, and if we can get the video to run, then I don't have to actually talk, and then we can, there we go, great. Might not have volume. Can anybody hear that? Okay. I can talk, we can go back to the prior slide and then I could talk about it. Okay, so the stop as yield law is new-ish by about 2 years now, I think. This is a law that allows for people on bikes when approaching an intersection to not have to come to a complete stop. They actually treat it as a yield if there are no other people at the intersection. So if it's clear there's no other cars waiting, they can approach it as a yield. It helps with the flow of traffic. If there are other cars or even people on bikes at an intersection, then they also have to stop as a car would have to stop. But it really allows for a better flow of traffic through, so a person on a bike doesn't have to lose their momentum. This does not apply at stoplights. It applies at stop signs. So this is good as an Oregon-friendly driver to know what to expect from people on bikes. Next slide. There we go. So hand signals. These are really great way to communicate. So as I tell the students, this is like a person on a bike's blinker and their brake lights. And it is amazing when people on bike use hand signals, because as you as a person driving then know what to anticipate. And so it's important to know what they mean. And if you feel like moving around a little bit, depending on how many presentations you've already seen, you're welcome to kind of do this with me and just move your arms a little bit. But practicing that, if you want to take a right hand turn, you're going to kind of bend that elbow and indicate. And even you might often see there's like they're pointing because they can see. You're more likely going to see that side of them. The alternative right is actually that a full extension and indicating that right hand turn. And the left hand turn is the full extension indicating the left hand turn. Also, a little point at the end is always helpful. And then a underutilized but fantastic hand signal is that stop hand signal. So these are really great ways for a person on a bike to communicate with you as a person driving. If you see that, then you can anticipate, and we all end up making it safer, have a safer experience on the road. There's a lot of reasons why people on bikes won't use hand signals. If they're going uphill, downhill, if it's raining or snowy or foggy, there's a lot of reasons they might not feel comfortable pulling one hand off the handlebars. So as an Oregon-friendly driver, what we ask of you is just to be looking for any signs of them trying to communicate. So often it might be eye contact, it could be verbal, they could be doing a shoulder check, looking over their shoulder just to kind of try to see what's going on. So know those clues, and then and anticipate they might be moving into your lane of traffic so that they can take a turn. There we go. So being doored is like a person on a bike's biggest fear. It's like not fun. And this applies to people on bikes. This applies to people running, walking, using any kind of sidewalks or multi-use trails where there might be adjacent parking. So it's against the law to take someone out with your door, and there's a system that that exists that can prevent you from doing this ever. So go ahead, next slide. And we'll show that system. So that system is called the Dutch Reach. So again, if you want to kind of like move your hands and fingers and wiggle your hands, I want you to find your far hand, so your right hand, which would be farthest from the door handle, and then wiggle those fingers so you know which hand that is. And then you're going to kind of turn and use that hand to open your door. And so what that does is it gives us a way bigger view shed of what's behind us. If we use the far hand to open the door, this applies to both sides of the car, depending on which one you're sitting in, and is a really helpful habit. It's something that all Oregon-friendly drivers should be implementing when they leave their car. Next slide, please. All right. I think that's passing the mic.
Yes. All right. So next we're going to be talking about infrastructure, which is things like the built environment and the paint on the road. So this is my favorite slide. This is the short history of traffic engineering. So in 1800, the system that we had here in Oregon was people were able to ride horses and people could walk. And those were their transportation options for, everything that they needed to do. And it worked great. They had pretty direct routes to wherever they needed to go. The system was built for them. By 1900, we had also added bikes and public transit. And people riding bikes, again, were able to use those same routes that were for, people on horseback as well as pedestrians, and had those good, safe, direct routes. For transit, they could pretty much get where they needed to go. We had pretty robust transit systems, streetcars, things like that in a lot of our cities. And they mostly got you where you needed to go, but it might take you a little bit out of direction because, things weren't built exactly for that. But you could mostly get there. By 1920, we had now added automobiles, and people weren't riding horses as frequently as they used to. So The system for automobiles was not quite as good. It would often take you longer. You'd have to do more wayfinding to figure out how you're going to get where you needed to go. And often the system was just entirely missing, that you couldn't take a car that way to get where you wanted to go. From 1950 to the present, everything has kind of reversed. So now, vehicles are prioritized, and everything is set up for people driving cars to be able to get directly where they need to go. And for everyone else, the system is a bit more difficult. It might be fragmented, entirely missing, sections, safe crossings, bike lanes, things like that. Transit is often pretty good in that you can get where you want to go, but it might take you quite a lot longer. It might take you way out of direction. You need to go south and it takes you way far east, and then you can come back south. And you can get there, but it'll take you a while longer. This is important to understand because it helps explain a lot of the behaviors that we see on our roadways. So building that patience and understanding that we're all just people trying to get where we need to go. When you look at this system as a whole, where someone might be doing something that you think is so silly, why are they doing that? But then you look at like, oh, they're trying to get over there. There is no safe crossing, so they decided to dart across here. It helps you understand and again, create that patience. All right. In rural and frontier Oregon, infrastructure is not a complete network. The photo on the left is from Bonanza School, and it shows a very wide, unmarked pavement where no instructions or visual cues exist to inform people that are driving about where to position themselves. The photo on the right shows where the paint has been added to show people where they might cross, but then it leads to, sorry, I was missing an image there. Getting confused. It shows where people can cross, but then it doesn't lead to any good network for them. No sidewalks, to continue their journey. And then the same thing with that bike lane on the lower right. In urban and suburban areas, bike lanes and sidewalks frequently appear and disappear. Painted crosswalks are often missing on wide roads with transit stops like this image here, where we can expect pedestrians to be crossing because they have to get to their bus stop. Crosswalks are sometimes entirely closed. Weather can also impact bike and pedestrian facilities that do exist. All of this leads, again, to those different behaviors that we see on our roadways with where people choose to walk and ride. All right, Whitney.
Okay, so I'm going to dive into the infrastructure for people walking. And one of the things about using infrastructure, I think in this crowd, we might be on board with that word, probably heard it a few times, but just it's the built environment, really. And when talking about it for people walking and biking, it can be as simple, kind of refer to certain, even just paint on the road, or as big as the pedestrian overcrossing. So next slide. In Oregon, every corner is a crosswalk. So looking at the graphic on the right-hand side, you can see these are examples of an unmarked crosswalk. But the person that's there's two people on adjacent corners. They would cross at those corners, and that is the permitted place for them to cross. What they are required to do is extend a toe, cane, hand, wheel into the intersection, and that's the way that they're communicating that they want to cross the street. And as what you're required to do is stop and allow them to cross. As an Oregon-friendly driver, the expectation really is to anticipate when people are looking to cross the road and to stop and allow them to cross when there's an unmarked crosswalk. And in this graphic on the right-hand side, the other thing you'll notice is the person in the bike lane, the person on the bike, is also required because they're in the road and they're required to follow the same rules of people driving. So they're also required to stop for the person walking and allow them to cross fully across the road. So one other thing to emphasize on this, there's great ways that you can be an Oregon friendly driver, and one of them is stopping at unmarked crosswalks, but also indicating to the person crossing through eye contact, through waving, through hand gestures, kind ones, to please cross the road, so that there's clear communication, and that way everyone feels a lot more comfortable depending on the mode that they are either choosing or not having a choice to use. So people out there at vulnerable users sometimes are getting around because they actually don't own a car. And to make them feel as comfortable on these roadways to get to the places they want to go as a person in a car is really important as an Oregon friendly driver. Next slide, please. So just as Lindsay had brought to attention that sometimes you'll see people crossing at places and sometimes the initial reaction is, why are they crossing right here? This is a great photo to show why that might have to happen. And these are legal places to cross in this intersection. And if you look down that road, there's no other spot for a person to cross. So there may be people coming from that neighborhood on the left-hand side that need to get to the Shell station to grab something at the Quickie Mart, and they're going to be crossing right there. So as an Oregon friendly driver, knowing that every corner is a crosswalk, we ask that you have your eyes open to anticipate that there will be vulnerable users that may be crossing, and that it would be very important to stop and allow them to get fully to the other side of the road. Next slide. This is an example showing our marked crosswalk, so the use of paint for infrastructure, and it's a much more clear place. I always tell students that's the best place to cross, unless an adult says this is a corner which is legally a crosswalk. But these are really clear ways and places for a person walking to cross, walking or rolling. And the person on the bike also is stopped at the crosswalk. The person in the gray truck is stopped before the crosswalk, and the same thing is on the other side of the intersection. So important to be able to, as an Oregon friendly driver, to stop if there are people indicating their interest in crossing the road and letting them cross fully to the other side, especially in a roadway similar to what you see in this graphic where there is no center island. They would need to get to the other side before you can continue on your journey. Next slide, please. So the different types of crosswalks that you will see as a person driving would be those clear marked crosswalks with white paint or colored paint, depending on where you are. There could be hatch marks. They can be done in a variety of ways, but just to be aware when you're approaching those and anticipate there might be people looking to cross the street there. There's mid-block crosswalks, which often could be just paint or could have rapid flashing beacons, which we will have a slide that follows that shows that more directly. And then there's the unmarked crosswalks. Next slide. So the rapid flashing beacons are infrastructure that you might often see in a mid-block crossing environment. And what's really important to note about these, there's a couple things. As an Oregon-friendly driver, you want to stop when you see the light blinking, but you also want to stop even if you simply see people standing by those. It's common that people that are looking to cross often may not know you actually have to select the button and to get the lights to flash. And so as an Oregon-friendly driver, if you see people waiting to cross, you'll stop and allow them to cross. By law, you only need to wait for them to get, say, seeing the graphic on the bottom right, there's an island. They only need to get to that middle island. But as an Oregon-friendly driver, you might as well go above and beyond and let them go all the way to the other side so everyone has a much more comfortable experience on the road. Next slide. All right, so a friendly driver does not pass a stopped vehicle at a crosswalk. So you can see this white car is stopped at the crosswalk, and so is the person on the bike, and there's a person crossing at the crosswalk. It is a very unfriendly thing to do. It's also against the law, but it's unfriendly to pass a stopped car because of the fact that as you're doing this, you're not going to have the same view as if you were stopped at the crosswalk. And so it's very easy to not see that there's a person crossing, and there can result in a crash. It is really important with any vehicle, but I would like to emphasize very large vehicles such as buses here, or trucks, but buses where they might be unloading passengers that might be crossing the crosswalk. You never want to pass a bus or anything carrying multiple people at a crosswalk, because that just increases the chances of there being an impact with a person walking. And this is very common at areas like surrounding schools where there's school buses and many students crossing. So definitely being an Oregon-friendly driver is important. Next slide. All right. We had another chance. I get all the polls. So one, friendly or not, looking at this image. And my question is about, that is a gray truck in the the gray truck is approaching the crosswalk. You see a person on a bike and there's a person crossing. My question is that gray truck acting as a Oregon-friendly driver? And go ahead and enter it, into the, everyone's so on it. Good. Kind of like this better than the poll because you can respond how you like. Excellent. Good. So you can keep on replying in there, and generally what I'm seeing is 100% correct. Exactly. The truck is stopped in the crosswalk. And so I like these graphical representations because you can really see what happens when you stop at a crosswalk. So what's going to happen is that person walking is now going to have to walk around the truck and enter into the intersection, which puts that person in an incredibly vulnerable position. So as an Oregon-friendly driver, you will stop before the crosswalk. There's those handy white lines. Sometimes the white paint can be faded, but we know we need to stop before the crosswalk, allow for the person walking to cross the street. That said, once the person walking has crossed the street and it is clear, you may move into where that crosswalk is to be able to see both directions before you turn. So that's still allowed, but you just have to make sure you stop at the crosswalk. Yeah, exactly like Julie said. Yeah, they can inch forward once it's clear of people walking. So that's the point there. All right.
Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to talk about infrastructure for people biking. So this image here, we have a bike lane. They help separate slower moving bike traffic from faster moving car traffic. People riding bikes are required to stay either in the bike lane or as far to the right as is practicable. However, they can leave the bike lane if needed. For example, hazard avoidance, overtaking, left turns, right turns, and going straight. They might move over to have appropriate lane positioning, to make themselves more visible in congested areas or avoid door zones. So to be a friendly driver, make sure that you check the bike lane is clear before you cross it. Make sure when you are having to cross bike lanes that you also look over your shoulder and check your blind spot. Don't just rely on your mirrors there. And then look ahead to anticipate bike riders' next moves. So this image here, we have a truck, and if they need to turn right, what they need to do is yield to anyone who is in that bike lane, along with pedestrians who might be crossing at that intersection before they cross the bike lane in the intersection to make their right turn. In some states, people are directed to pull over and drive in that bike lane to make their right turn. That's not the case in Oregon. In Oregon, we leave that bike lane to the right there and then cross it in the intersection. Here's one kind of exception to that. So in this image, we have a bike lane that you have to cross before you get to the intersection, and then make a right turn. So in this scenario, to be a friendly driver, what you need to do is, again, yield to anyone who is there in that intersection before you cross it. Don't sit in that bike lane, waiting to move right. You need to cross it quickly after everyone who is there has already moved through. So we are not allowed to park in bike lanes either, to grab a latte, or again, you can't drive in them while we are traveling to our destinations, except for in the course of official duty, which is folks like emergency services, utility workers, not most of us. So again, to be a friendly driver, remember to cross that bike lane quickly after you have yielded to everyone who is already using it. This is another type of bike lane. This is called a buffered bike lane. So these just give everyone a little bit more space and help them feel a little bit more comfortable. So again, make sure before you cross it that it is clear. These are popping up a lot more frequently throughout Oregon. These are protected bike lanes. The one in this image here is a parking protected bike lane. So these have some sort of actual physical barrier in between the bike lane and the motor vehicle travel lane. This is a great spot with these parking protected ones to remember your Dutch reach for your passengers. And it's another reason to teach everyone that Dutch reach, because now the bike lane has moved to the right side of that vehicle there. So everyone needs to look over their shoulder and check and make sure that that bike lane is clear before they open their car doors. I also like to, remind people to make sure that you park in the correct spot. Again, as these are new, people don't always know where these are in their communities and sometimes accidentally park in that bike lane because they're used to parking along the curb. Follow the signage, follow the paint on the road. It usually indicates that you should be parking actually over a little bit and leaving that bike lane clear. All right, so now I get a poll. So looking at this gray truck here, is what they're doing friendly or not? Drop it in the chat. What do you think? No, pretty unanimous. So again, it's illegal for folks to stop in that bike lane, except in the course of official duty, which again, not most of us. All right, Sharrows. On smaller roads, narrow roads that don't have bike lanes and have slow speeds, you might see sharrows or shared lane markings. So when you see a sharrow, expect to slow down and then drive with bikes, probably taking that middle of the lane. The arrow is showing bicycle riders where they're supposed to ride, that they're not supposed to ride to the right because usually these lanes are too narrow for you to pass them safely in the lane and to split that lane. Even if they do still ride to the right, still follow behind them because there's probably not space for you. These are in Portland on our neighborhood greenways. If you watched the earlier bike train presentation, Hood River, they were talking about, they've got some of these in their downtown area. So they're pretty common to see in all sorts of areas around Oregon. So make sure you understand that they're not a sign saying that bicycle riders need to share their space with you. It's a sign saying that you need to share your space with those bicycle riders. These are usually, again, slow speeds. Everyone can travel calmly, comfortably. So to be a friendly driver, give enough space to the people riding bikes. Don't try and squeeze by. Wait for a safe place to pass or for a bike lane to reappear. All right, so we have the next one. So in this image, we see two folks who are riding their bikes two abreast, and then a person driving behind them in the white car. So is what these two bicycle riders doing, is that friendly or not? Is that something that they're allowed to do? We see one yes, one not friendly. Yes, I think. Yes, so this is actually something that's legal. So again, these sharrows are usually on our slower roads where bicycle riders can keep up with the speed of traffic. So they are allowed to ride two abreast here because they are not holding up traffic. All right, roundabouts. These are also sometimes known as traffic circles. They're pretty cool. They reduce ways to crash, they reduce speeds, and help increase safety. At a regular intersection with a light, there are 32 different ways to crash, but at a roundabout, there's only 4. People walking and biking have ways to interact at an intersection that are different than cars with a different angle. So, what do you need to know to be a friendly driver when coming up on a roundabout? Don't pass people in a roundabout. One thing a lot of bike riders will think that they need to ride, to the right when they're in them and share that lane. These lanes are not wide enough for the lane to actually be shared. So even if they've chosen to ride to the right, again, just like on the roads with Sharrows, continue to follow from behind and don't try and squeeze by them. Remember that people who are driving must yield to anyone who's already inside that roundabout before entering. And then remember to look for people who are crossing at the crosswalks, both when entering and exiting the roundabout. So to be a friendly driver, look twice for people riding bikes and crossing in those crosswalks, and be sure to signal when you're exiting so that everyone around you knows what you're doing. Bike boxes. Bike boxes are used to group riders near the stop bar of an intersection. This helps increase their visibility, gets people through that intersection more quickly and out of motorists' way. It helps reduce conflict, and it's very important for you to know that right turns on red lights are not permitted at intersections with bike boxes. I see people making that error all the time. So to be a friendly driver, what you need to do is stop where it says wait here outside of that bike box so that bicyclists can use it. And even if there are no bicyclists there, do not scoot up into it. You can't make a right turn on that red anyway. Just wait behind it. And then once the light changes, yield to those folks who are there. Let them continue through the intersection, and then you can continue either driving straight or making your right turn. All right, cross bikes. This is a Portland specific infrastructure piece. They have these green bars that highlight the extension of the bikeway through the intersection. That green paint, it helps send a clear message to people who are driving that roads are not just for cars, that you might see cyclists in these areas too. It's a visual reminder of where they're riding as well, where that bike lane is. So people driving cars are not legally required to stop for the people who are riding bikes the way you would for folks crossing in the crosswalk. If the folks on the bikes move into that crosswalk area, then you have to yield to them, but you don't have to. However, a lot of people don't know that, and so a lot of bike riders do just ride through. So it's important for you as a friendly driver to keep an extra eye out in these areas and watch for people who are riding through so that you don't cause a collision. All right, Whitney.
All right, so in light of that, collisions, We're going to talk about a few scenarios and ways that, as Oregon-friendly drivers, we can prevent them or at least lessen the severity of these common scenarios that do happen. Next slide, please. Perfect. Squeeze by is a very common scenario for a person on a bike, and this is an example of when a person driving is just simply not giving enough space to a person on a bike. They're doing unsafe passing, and in this scenario, what should the person driver do differently? And there are several options for this person driving. One would be to stay back and wait until it is safe to be able to provide enough of that fall space, depending on the speed, or just the largest amount of space possible so that they can move by that person on a bike safely and so everyone's comfortable, and so that there is not a collision or a crash. Next slide, please. Right hook. This is the one I mentioned just happened to me, and I've actually been taken off my bike twice by a right hook. They're very common, and this example is showing the person driving the truck taking a right-hand turn without having noticed the person on the bike in the bike lane that would be going straight. So that person on the bike lane is going straight through the intersection, the person on the truck is turning, and there tends to be that point of contact during that right-hand turn. So what could be done differently in this scenario? Well, the Oregon-friendly driver of that truck would be looking for people on bikes and in the bike lane, also for people walking, crossing the street before making that turn in order to avoid that right hook. And this is in a scenario too where now you all understand that there could be wrong way riders, and it's important to, as Oregon-friendly drivers, anticipate that this is a thing. It's very common for people on bikes to be going the wrong way, and it's important for us as Oregon-friendly drivers, as much as we want them to know that it's much safer if they do ride the right direction, it's not always the case, and we just all want to make it home at the end of the day. So there might be wrong way riders. So as Oregon-friendly driver, to prevent these kind of scenarios, make sure you look both in that bike lane from both directions. Next slide, please. Left cross is similar. It's a similar term of events. The person driving and taking that left-hand turn in the truck is not looking in the bike lane and takes a left-hand turn, and would likely be a crash with the person on the bike as they go straight. So how is this avoided? The Oregon-friendly driver behind the wheel of that truck is looking in all of the bike lanes before they make that turn to make sure it's free and clear so that they can safely get through the intersection. Next slide. So like I mentioned already in that slide before, it's this wrong way left cross. So it's very dangerous for the person on the bike to be wrong way riding. As an Oregon-friendly driver, the way we avoid this is we look both ways. We understand that kind of complex nature of wrong way riding, whether it's someone that's new to riding their bike on the road and they think that's what they're supposed to do, or they maybe are riding their bike and they need to take a turn or need to be on that side of the road or came from that side of the road and just haven't had the opportunity to get into the other bike lane. So we know, yes, it is the person on the bike is in the wrong because they're going the wrong direction, but the implications to that person on the bike versus your front bumper is going to be much more severe. So ultimately, as an Oregon-friendly driver, how we avoid this is that we wait for that person, we keep our eyes open, we're anticipating, we're looking at the bike lanes in both directions, and we make sure that the person on the bike makes it across, so then we can continue on our day and not have to deal with the implications of a impact in an intersection. Next slide, please. Now, this is showing a very common scenario of a person on a bike leaving a bike lane. So we call that taking the lane. And there are lots of reasons why a person on a bike will need to leave the lane. And you see here we've got a recycle can that's in the bike lane. And so the person on the bike has to leave the bike lane and move into the main lane of traffic. The other reasons why a person on a bike may need to take the lane would be to maybe make a left-hand turn. If there's any obstruction in that bike lane, or if there's water, or they don't feel safe in the bike lane, the safest place for the person on the bike really is in the main lane of traffic. So this is a common pattern you'll see with people on bikes. So what we're asking of Oregon-friendly drivers in order to prevent a crash when a person on a bike is taking the lane is to anticipate when there might be a person on a bike leaving their bike lane. So if you're in that white vehicle and notice that there is an obstruction in the bike lane, that person may take the lane, it's good to slow down and expect them to enter your lane of traffic. Next slide. So impaired driving. This would be a whole nother topic along with distracted driving. This is just basically something that we don't do, right? There's too many chances of not only hurting, killing, and getting in a crash with a person on a bike, with other vulnerable users, other people driving. There's just very little way, there's less ways that you can prepare yourself and your reaction time is impacted. So we don't do this. We don't impair drive, and then we don't have to worry about having a crash from this. Next slide, please. Again, same thing, really in the same light, distracted driving. This is just one thing that we don't do, because as you see in this image, the person on the bike is taking the lane because there's some kind of obstruction in the bike lane. If the person driving is busy sending that MW LOL text message and doesn't see the person on the bike, there likely will be a crash. Obviously, this is absolutely a crash because we all know the implications from making these kind of decisions on the road of being distracted. And so there's lots of ways, not only texting, we can be messing with our stereo, we can even be cognitively distracted, having our mind not present, not there when we're driving. And this also can result in a distracted driving crash. So you have a lot of responsibility as a person driving behind the wheel, and it's important that you are not distracted while driving so you can anticipate and see when anything changes, and specifically if there's vulnerable users out there. Next, speeding. Again, so speeding is something that it significantly reduces your reaction time. So it just takes a small amount of going over the speed limit to significantly reduce reaction time and significantly increase the severity of a crash. And in this example, we're looking at a person on a bike taking the lane because there's an obstruction, but speeding 10 miles over the speed limit does not give the person driving enough reaction time to be able to move over, slow down, do what needs to be done so that they don't end up crashing into the person on the bike. So next slide, please. The reason, and then this just illustrates exactly that point of how quickly we can increase the severity of these crashes. So at 20 miles per hour, there's a 10% chance that the vulnerable user that gets hit ends up dead. And it's harsh words. I want this all to be yay, uplifting, but the reality is people will end up dead if we are not more cognizant of the speeds that we are moving at. And I think a lot of us are on board with that. The best way we can really be more inviting to all users is to not have these really high speeds, just thinking about just moving cars filled with people, but that it actually causes so much danger to the other users. So adding 10 miles per hour onto that speed, you end up seeing a 40% increase that person that is hit will end up dead. Adding another 10 on top of that at 40 miles per hour, we have an 80% chance that the person that is hit will end up dead. And this is just far too high and never worth the risk. So as an organ-friendly driver, what we're saying and asking and demanding at this point is that really that you do not speed. There's very few benefits to speeding, in addition to burning more of the fossil fuels that we're paying such a high cost for and putting all of the users in danger. Next slide, please. So if you can take nothing else from this organ-friendly driver course, one thing that we ask is to please slow down and keep on sharing that message of how important it is to maintain a slow speed. And another thing about the speeds is that these were made in our roadways by people that's what they do. We say they're people that are smarter, they're not safe routes school educators, but they are designed to create these speeds so that it's safe. And it's best to follow them, and then everyone ends up making it home safe at the end of the day. Because, like we said, when there is a crash involving a vulnerable user, the way that person experiences their life from that day forward will be different. Whether or not they end up having a severe injury or other type of experience from that, as a person driving, it's a lot of responsibility, and you can make a huge impact on a person's life in a very negative way. So it is much better to maintain slow speeds and be an Oregon-friendly driver so that we can all have make it home for dinner at the end of the day. Um, and yeah, thank you. That's my point. Go ahead, Lindsay.
All right, so thank you. We are now at the end of the presentation, and we have our post-test available. Whitney, if you can drop the link to that in the chat. Otherwise, you can scan it with your phone from the little QR code there. And then if you've got questions, please feel free to type them up in the chat here or raise your hand, and we can go through some of those. But we'll give you guys a few minutes here to fill out this post test so that we can see what did you learn from this class. Hopefully now you're all going to get 100% if you didn't get 100% at the very start. And yeah, as Whitney said, we're definitely happy to share slides and graphics. You can always reach out to us by going to OregonFriendlyDriver.org and then filling out the little contact us form. Yeah. So give you a minute to fill out that post test. That post test also includes a little spot for some feedback. So if you have feedback for us on how to make this better, or want to tell us about how much you loved it, we are happy to hear all feedback. We're also happy to chat with you further if you want to chat about any specifics of it. And again, we also teach these classes virtually across Oregon, in person in the Portland metro area, the Bend and Central Oregon area, and then in Lane County. So again, OregonFriendlyDriver.org, you can get in touch with us there. Or if you know folks that should take this class individually, we have an online version of the class on our website there as well, that you can just take by yourself. Again, we're happy to come out to chat with workplaces, organizations, other groups, and bring this class for free because it is sponsored by the Oregon Department of Transportation. So again, that's why we really need you to fill out this post test and give us this awesome data. And then once you finish that, if you've got any other questions, again, you can drop them in the chat or raise your hand. Let's see. So we got one question here. Do you make small videos that can be shared at assemblies or in parent newsletters? We don't have that right now, but maybe that's something that we could work on for the future. I've definitely gotten similar requests before. So yeah, that's a great idea. And then I'll share this as well. This is the QR code for the Oregon Friendly Driver course that's online on demand that anyone can do anytime by themselves. It's got our little pre and post test. The only con with it is that you can't quite ask us questions there, but you can still get in contact with us through that if you've got questions after that, or if you send this to a friend and they've got questions. Oh yeah, Mary Jo, yeah, created some awesome videos for school circulation. If you happen to have the link to that and you want to drop that in the chat, those are really awesome, especially for Safe Routes folks or anyone else who works with school circulation. Yeah, so I see I already submitted the post test, but realized I had a comment. In my area of North Portland, it's common to see wheelchair users using bike lanes because tree roots make the sidewalks impassable. Yes. So bike lanes, it's all the same. They can be used both by bicycles as well as e-scooters, wheelchairs, mobility scooters, all of those. Yeah, we definitely can mention that a little more in future presentations. Thanks, Mary Jo, for sharing that link. So we have a couple more minutes here too, if anyone else has other questions or comments. Yeah, and as Heidi mentioned, business owners are encouraged to have staff take this. This is also great, both for staff that just drive for their commute, as well as professional drivers that might drive for part of their job. We're happy to chat with both groups. Have you been teaching this to student drivers or as a part of Safe Routes School? We have been connecting with student drivers. I've done some work with Portland Community College and their driver's ed program. I know Whitney's done some work. Yeah.
Yeah, we on in this region we offer it through the driver's ed classes that are taught at the high schools. So I've taught at the one in Bend area is virtual still, and the actual driver's ed teacher uses our slides and has watched this presentation, and he shares it with his students every session. And then I've done the in-person teaching, in-person classroom presentation to the Redmond High School driver's ed students. So it's definitely getting out there, and we're kind of always leaning into that area as much as we can because there's a lot of opportunity there.
Yeah, we've tried to do some train the trainer as well through one of the driver's ed conferences to try and help give them this information so that they can integrate it into their own curriculum, because we know we can't make it to every single driver's ed class out there. And as Heidi said, if you know any driver's ed instructors in your area, please send them to us. We're happy to share materials or come talk to their classes directly. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, then on behalf of ODOT, the Street Trust, Safe Lane Transportation Coalition, and Commute Options, thank you for participating in the Oregon Friendly Driver Program, and we look forward to safely sharing the road with you in the future.